the school hunk confessed his love to me. However, my uncle who had raised me for many years led people to ruin the confession scene. It made me mistakenly think that he also had feelings for me. So when he was framed, I sacrificed myself to save him. But when I woke up, he suddenly turned cold and heartless, grabbing my neck and questioning me, "You're just a substitute for Vindictive. How dare you break my 30-year vow of chastity for her?" Then he imprisoned me in the basement and tortured me every day. Later, he sent me to the operating table for a heart replacement surgery. That's when I finally realized all these years he had carefully taken care of me from childhood to adulthood. It was all because of my heart that was a perfect match for his first love. Vindictive. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day he was drugged. The moment I opened my eyes, I instinctively reached for the position of my heart. My chest was still intact. My heart was beating healthily and vigorously inside. It hadn't been taken out, but I still couldn't believe it. I had actually been reborn. Until a rush of hurried footsteps came from behind me. "Miss." I turned around at the sound. I saw a muscular man running over in a hurry. He stopped 3 steps away from me. Slightly out of breath. "Sir has been drugged," he said. But I didn't exclaim in panic as he expected. Instead, I stared fixedly at his face. The thick hatred in my eyes could hardly be suppressed, as if it was about to turn into boiling lava and gush out. If you were to ask who else I hated besides Maleficent and Vindictive, that despicable couple, it must be the person in front of me, Traitor. Maleficent's personal bodyguard. He was also Vindictive's spy, staying by his side to keep an eye on him. In my previous life, right after I saw off my classmates and friends who had attended my birthday party, Traitor suddenly informed me that Maleficent had been drugged. At that time, my feelings for Maleficent were at their peak. As soon as I heard that something had happened to him, I didn't care about anything else and urged Traitor to take me to find him. I even forgot that Traitor hated me the most. Usually, whenever I got close to Maleficent, he would be on high alert, wishing he could throw me miles away. So how could he think of me first when something happened to Maleficent? It was only later that I realized all of this was Vindictive's scheme. She was jealous of Maleficent's favor towards me, so she staged all of this on her own. Her purpose was to get me away from Maleficent. But I was still thrown off balance by my concern and fell into the trap. My life, from then on, it fell into an abyss of no return. "Miss, Sir has been drugged." Seeing that I kept staring at him without speaking, a trace of disgust flashed in Traitor's eyes, and he patiently repeated himself. I suddenly came back to my senses and pretended to be shocked and angry, saying, "Who did this?" This was the normal reaction a young girl should have when hearing that the male god she had a crush on was in trouble. When Traitor saw this, he secretly let out a sigh of relief. He naturally picked up on my act and shook his head. "I don't know. Sir's current condition is very dangerous. You should come with me and take a look quickly." Without asking for my consent, he grabbed my arm and dragged me towards the presidential suite on the top floor. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. There came the low, unbearable groans of a man from inside. It made me feel physically uncomfortable. Just when I was about to vomit, Traitor said, "Miss, please take care of Sir. I'll go call the doctor." I lowered my eyes and pretended to agree. "Okay." I put my hand on the doorknob, pretending to push the door open. When Traitor saw this, a triumphant smile curved his lips, and his hand quietly reached out towards my shoulder. But I was one step ahead of him. I turned around and grabbed his arm, and when he wasn't prepared, I kicked him into the room. Then I closed the door and locked it from the inside. The actions were completed in one smooth motion. Traitor, who had been trying to scheme but ended up getting his comeuppance, flew into a rage and banged on the door vigorously. "Astra, what are you doing? Let me out quickly." "I'll let me out. Please." His angry roar suddenly changed in tone halfway through. In order to achieve her goal, Vindictive had ruthlessly drugged Maleficent with a powerful aphrodisiac. The lust had driven him completely out of his mind, unable to distinguish between humans and animals. Whether it was male or female, as long as it could give him the antidote, it was good. So when he saw Traitor, he pounced on him like a drowning man clutching at a straw. Regardless of everything, This was really tough for Traitor, a straight man, who had to endure the pain that was almost unbearable. Perhaps he also knew what was about to happen to him. So his knocking on the door became more and more urgent, and a hint of panic gradually crept into his voice. Astra, open the door quickly. I deliberately ignored his words and shouted loudly, Brother Han, please take good care of my uncle. I'd better go find the doctor myself. After saying that, I turned around and ran. I didn't dare to stop until I had run out of the hotel in one breath, looking at the busy street with its flowing traffic. My hands trembled with excitement. I finally didn't repeat my previous mistakes and avoided the bad luck of my past life. When I was 12 years old, my parents died in a car accident. They left behind only me, a lonely and helpless child, and a huge amount of inheritance. In order to fight for my custody and get this inheritance, a group of relatives fought each other fiercely. That's when Maleficent appeared. At that time, I had already given up on so-called family affection. So when Uncle Maleficent, who was a good friend of my father despite their age difference, asked me if I was willing to go with him, I nodded without hesitation. After adopting me, Maleficent did his best. When I was awakened from a nightmare about the car accident, he would patiently coax me to sleep. When I cried bitterly because I missed my parents extremely, he would hug me tightly and comfort me. Under his meticulous care, I got out of the shadow of my parents' death. In the huge villa, there were only the two of us. As I entered puberty, my admiration and dependence on him gradually turned into the throbbing of youth. Because of our difference in status, I didn't dare to express my feelings. Until the school hunk, who had been my partner in experiments for 2 years, prepared a grand confession for me. Upon hearing this news, Maleficent flew back from abroad overnight and smashed the confession scene. Then, in front of thousands of people, he forcefully took me away. I will always remember the look in his eyes when he looked at the school hunk at that time as dark as ink. There was a storm brewing in his deep eyes. He wished he could skin and bone him alive. When he turned his eyes to look at me, his gaze became intense and deep, filled with a strong sense of possessiveness. Realizing this, I was both shocked and delighted. Did this mean that Maleficent also had feelings for me? As if to prove my guess, in our subsequent interactions, Maleficent no longer cared about the differences between men and women, and there was always a faint hint of ambiguity in his words and actions. It was because of this that the feelings I had suppressed so hard finally had a chance to take root. Until I was about to turn 20 years old, Maleficent personally planned a grand birthday party for me. He gently stroked my head and said, "Soon, women, I will be able to be with Astra forever." Hearing these words, I felt overjoyed. I made up my mind to break the ice and confess my feelings after the birthday party ended. But before I could confess, I had a relationship with him first. At that time, I naively thought that when Maleficent woke up, he would feel guilty and regretful. But what swept over me instead was his overwhelming fury. He tightly grasped my neck and questioned me out of control. "Astra, you're just a substitute for Vindictive. How dare you break my 30-year vow of chastity for her? How dare you?" That's when I realized the name he called wasn't Astra, but Vindictive. But what was even more terrifying and sorrowful than being a substitute was Maleficent had carefully raised me for many years. Not because of his old friendship with my father, but because of the heart in my body that was a perfect match for his first love, Vindictive. Even the car accident that killed my parents was planned by Maleficent. His purpose was to have the opportunity to become my guardian. The truth came crashing down violently and abruptly. But it was still too late. Because soon after, I was pushed onto the operating table by Maleficent. After losing my virginity, Maleficent often felt guilty towards Vindictive. So when she said, "Just thinking that she has occupied you for so many years and even got your first time," I'm consumed by jealousy, and my heart aches. Maleficent ordered that the anesthesia be skipped, and he had someone cut out my heart alive. This time, if I don't send Maleficent, Vindictive, and Traitor to hell, I'll have lived my second life in vain. The overwhelming hatred was about to overwhelm my reason. And suddenly, a torrential rain fell, waking me up. I closed my eyes and took a taxi to my best friend Loyal's house. "Astra, You're not. When she saw me soaking wet, her expression changed. What happened? I grabbed her hand tightly, looked into her worried eyes and eyebrows, and asked, Loyal, you'll help me, won't you? Yes, Abite, no matter what happens, I will help you. Loyal pushed me into the bathroom while answering seriously. It wasn't until I took a shower, dried my hair, and drank a bowl of ginger soup to dispel the cold that she carefully asked me, Astra, what on earth happened to you? The matter of being reborn was too mysterious, so I only dared to tell her part of the truth. My parents were killed by Maleficent. Why? Maleficent's public image was too noble and upright. But as my best friend since childhood, Loyal didn't doubt me. Instead, she was puzzled by the reason why Maleficent did it. Was it for money? But didn't he make a public notarization on the whole internet back, and that he would return all of the Astra family's property to you after you graduated from university? Because of Vindictive. I touched the position of my heart, looked up at her, and said the most terrifying words in the calmest tone. Vindictive has a serious heart disease and could die at any time. And I'm the person whose heart is the best match for hers. With just one sentence, Loyal felt a chill down her spine. She suddenly grabbed my hands and said, Astra, don't go back. From today on, you can live in my house. After saying that, she hugged me tightly, filled with heartache and fear. I quietly leaned against her, breathing in the fragrance of her body wash, and the heart that had been hanging in the air finally settled down. My best friend Loyal, she is the only person I can trust unconditionally. She is also my last haven. Here with her, I was able to fall into a peaceful slumber. To soothe my frayed nerves, Loyal personally took to the kitchen and prepared a sumptuous breakfast. During the meal, she shared with me the revenge plans she had been racking her brain over all night long. Each one was extremely insidious and dangerous. They were nothing more than things like poisoning, assassination, and the like. I felt a bit helpless and said, This is the Jade dynasty. Killing people is against the law. Loyal's knife and fork, which were cutting the steak, stopped for a moment. Then she realized it, and said, Oh, right. However, after only a second of distress, she said, We can trick them abroad and kill them there. Loyal is of mixed jaw and white ethnicity. Loyal's father is the powerful boss who dominates a region in Bai Dong Di. But he retired from his underworld activities and stepped back to the second line after falling head over heels in love at first sight with Loyal's beautiful and charming mother. The reason I turn to her for help is not only that she is the person I trust the most, but also largely because of her father. Only with the help of her father can I get even with my enemies. Loyal was constantly observing my expression. Seeing that I didn't object, she snapped her fingers and said, It's a deal. After formulating the ways for Maleficent and the others to die, the atmosphere turned lighthearted. For the latter part of the breakfast, only the sounds of laughter and chatting between me and Loyal remained on the dining table. However, this relaxed and pleasant atmosphere was soon shattered by a phone call from Maleficent. When Loyal and I, accompanied by more than a dozen muscular and sturdy bodyguards, returned to the Gu family mansion, we were greeted by a dull and eerie atmosphere. Traitor, with his upper body bare, had a mixture of wet marks and hickeys on his body, giving off an ambiguous air amidst the chaos. It was evident how wild the night had been. As soon as he saw me, his anger welled up uncontrollably. Pointing at me, he shouted, Astra, it's all your fault. It's all because of you that I and Mr. Gu, did you sleep together? Before he could finish, Loyal exclaimed in surprise first and then asked curiously, Who was on top and who was on the bottom between you two? As soon as these words came out, Traitor's face instantly turned betrayed. Upon closer inspection, there was even a hint of shyness. I was startled in my heart. A terrifying thought flashed through my mind. Traitor likes Maleficent. Could it be? Before I could delve deeper, Maleficent erupted first. Slap. He slammed his hand on the tea table. His sharp eagle-like eyes swept towards Loyal, and his voice was cold and menacing. It seems that even after staying in the Jade dynasty for so long, Loyal still hasn't grasped the true meaning of the 4 words, be cautious in words and deeds. I don't mind teaching you a lesson on behalf of your father. The word teach carried a hidden meaning, full of murderous intent. Loyal has always been fearless. Being threat, and like this. She immediately puffed out her chest, ready to retort. But we were still on someone else's territory at that moment. It wasn't advisable to confront them head-on. I held her back and changed to my usual coquettish tone, saying, Uncle, had in facile land session. Please calm down. You know that Loyal has lived abroad since she was a child and has an open mind. She just said the wrong thing for a moment. But she didn't mean any harm. Please. For my sake. Forgive her this time. Sure enough. As soon as I said this, the topic shifted back to me from Loyal. Vindictive, who had been standing silently beside Maleficent, suddenly turned her gaze towards me. With extreme hatred in her eyes, she asked, Astra, weren't you supposed to find a doctor for your uncle? Why didn't you come back after looking for a whole night? I did look for one, I said with an innocent expression, rolling up my sleeves to reveal the bruises on my arm. But as soon as I went out, I encountered gangsters. Fortunately, hadn't stealthily. Loyal showed up in time and saved me. Uncle. There was no one else in the hotel last night except me and Traitor. I couldn't even find anyone to ask for help. Vindictive. Who do you think is capable enough to transfer all the people in the hotel? As I said this, I stared fixedly at Vindictive, as if I was about to call out her name directly. Upon hearing this, Maleficent's sinister gaze also turned towards her. Caught off guard, Vindictive lost her composure and instinctively defended herself. Maleficent. No. It wasn't me. How could I push you on to someone else? Her eyes were filled with tears. And she looked at the man pitifully. Unfortunately, she didn't win the man's sympathy. Because she was the owner of this hotel. Except for her. Even Maleficent didn't have the authority to transfer the hotel staff. Her pale defense couldn't hold up. Vindictive also understood this and feigned illness tactically. She clutched her chest and began to gasp in pain. Maleficent. Maleficent. Save me. Keep pretending. You can keep pretending. Maleficent sat there firmly, looking at her coldly. It wasn't until her slightly ruddy face started to turn pale. Fine beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. And her body went limp as she fell helplessly to the ground that Maleficent panicked. He didn't dare to take the risk. He suddenly stood up, quickly caught Vindictive who was about to fall, and rushed out of the hotel. He ordered Traitor. Prepare the car. Let's go to the hospital. Whether Vindictive was really having an attack or faking it, she managed to avoid this crisis. I tugged at Loyal and said, let's go too. But we didn't really leave. Instead, we changed to a more low-key car and quietly followed them. Maleficent hates being schemed against by others the most in his life, even if it's his beloved. In my previous life, I stood in front as a buffer. Later, when the truth came out, Maleficent still blew up in a huge rage and ignored Vindictive for a long time. In this life, the person who slept with Maleficent has become Traitor. Even though he knows that Vindictive is the one who orchestrated all of this, Maleficent still won't really be willing to hurt her. So, the only person he can vent his anger on is Traitor. Sure enough, we didn't have to wait long before we saw Traitor driving out of the hospital garage. But he wasn't following Maleficent's order to go back to Maleficent's family ancestral home to get the documents. Instead, he drove all the way out of Joan City. However, as soon as he got on the national highway, several cars suddenly rushed out from the front and squeezed him from both sides, forcing him to stop. Then several unfamiliar men in black clothes got out of those cars. The leader knocked on the car window. Traitor had no choice but to get out of the car. What on earth do you want? In response to him was a huge spiked club. Bang! After that, he was taken by the men in black to an abandoned factory in a remote suburban area. One by one, they used the spiked clubs to beat him. Even though Traitor had some martial arts skills, he was ultimately outnumbered. Just when he thought he was definitely going to die that day, the shrill sound of police sirens sounded outside the factory. Seeing this, those men in black were afraid that the police were coming. They gave Traitor another blow on the head and quickly fled. After they left, Loyal and I led more than a dozen sturdy bodyguards into the factory. I circled around Traitor twice. Looking at his bruised and battered body, I clicked my tongue in amazement. Oh. The usually most trusted bodyguard Han also has such a day. It's really pitiful. As I said this, I squatted down and stared into his eyes. It hurts a lot, doesn't it? Traitor let out weak and painful gasps. But he was still glaring at me furiously. Astra. If it weren't for you, how could I have ended up like this? Upon hearing this, the playful expression on my face vanished. I picked up the spiked club beside me and poked it at his injured abdomen. Blame me? Did I tell you to scheme against Maleficent? Or did I tell him to kill you? If it weren't for me, you would have gone to see the king of hell already. The sharp spikes of the club sank into his flesh, instantly reopening his wound and causing blood to gush out. Traitor's face contorted in pain. But in a daze, he still managed to grasp at the straw of hope. With a hint of surprise, he asked, "You can save me? It's really convenient to talk to someone intelligent." I dropped the spiked club and stood up. With a soft laugh, I said, "Not only can I save you, but I can also make Maleficent your captive." Upon hearing this, a blazing light shone in Traitor's eyes that had been as lifeless as ashes. Evidently, he was tempted. After the terms were agreed upon, I walked out of the abandoned factory expressionlessly and got into the fifth car in the motorcade. Loyal sat in the passenger seat, while buckling up her seatbelt. She let out a surprised tut sound. I just said it casually. I didn't expect that Traitor really has improper thoughts about Maleficent. Then she asked me, "Astra, can you really ensure that the evidence you mentioned to Traitor can restrain Maleficent?" Of course. My face was cold as I turned the steering wheel and started the car. This is a bomb that's enough to blow up the entire Maleficent family empire. Maleficent is sinister and ruthless. And he leaves no room for mistakes in his actions. If it hadn't been for me accidentally overhearing his conversation with someone else on the operating table, I would never have known Maleficent's rise to power is filled with countless misdeeds. When he was abroad, he was just an unknown lackey. His name was Dino. Because of his ignoble background, he was regarded as an inferior person. Everyone could bully him. Once, when he was being bullied again, a kind-hearted person came to his rescue. But after being saved, instead of being grateful, Maleficent brutally killed that kind-hearted person. Then he stole his token and took his place to join the gang that the person was supposed to enter. It was precisely because of this token that the undercover agent lurking in the gang mistook him for the person sent by the organization. The undercover agent tried every means to get in touch with him. Maleficent played along and pretended to be the undercover agent's comrade to extract useful information. He reaped the benefits when the two sides clashed. Finally, having fulfilled l'envie, he had plastic surgery, changed his name, and returned to the country after whitewashing himself. He became a respected national entrepreneur overnight. However, no matter how carefully he calculated, he didn't expect that there was still an insider who had survived by chance. This person is a witness to his heinous past. After listening to me, even the well-informed Loyal couldn't help but be shocked. She opened her mouth, and it took her a long time to speak. She asked me hesitantly, "Are you talking about the time when the Zhao dynasty and Bai Dongdi jointly cleared out the drug den?" I nodded with a solemn expression. Brute. Loyal was so angry, and her lips were trembling. No wonder he could come up with the idea of live heart donation. He deserves to be cut into pieces. So, hadn't fulfilled l'envie. We're not just avenging our personal grudges. We're also ridding the people of a scourge. I defined our current action. Loyal's father has been in seclusion for many years. Without the drive of interests, he may not necessarily help me. But now the situation is different. Don't worry. If my dad doesn't agree, I'll ask my mom to beat his head in. Loyal thought it made perfect sense. She clenched her fists and swung them in the air as if she was really doing it. Even so, Loyal's father didn't believe me easily. Until he really rescued the informant who was on the run at the approximate location I provided. That night, Loyal's father flew directly to the Zhao dynasty. After a long journey, he pushed open the door of the villa and questioned me. How do you know these things that even the World Investigation Bureau is not aware of? The World Investigation Bureau. It is subordinate to the International Security Department. It is specialized in investigating and handling terrorist incidents that pose a threat to the whole world. Loyal's father is truly worthy of being the powerful leader of a region. He exudes an imposing aura. Just standing there makes people feel intimidated. I swallowed hard and tried to stay calm. Loyal, Uncle Loyal. As soon as I opened my mouth, Loyal's mother, who came in later, slapped Loyal's father on the head and scolded. "You fool! You scared our Astra." The man who had been so imposing just now instantly turned into a henpecked husband. He said pitifully, "Honey, I didn't mean to." "Ben, what art?" The couple started flirting as if no one else was around. Looking at this scene, I thought of my father, who was both a henpecked husband and a doting father to his daughter. If there hadn't been this car accident, the way my family got along would probably have been like this too. In order not to alert the enemy, Loyal's father and Loyal's mother only stayed in Zhong City for one night and then took the earliest flight back to Bai Dongdi. On the other hand, according to the information I provided, Traitor managed to survive from Maleficent's hands. However, he also incurred Maleficent's suspicion and lost his personal freedom. Maleficent has been complacent for too long. He thought everything was foolproof. But he didn't expect that there was still a transparent executioner's blade hanging above his head, ready to take his life at any moment. Because of this, Maleficent became extremely paranoid. The slightest sign of trouble was enough to stir his sensitive and suspicious nerves. He was desperately eager to find the informant. He secretly sent people to search for him. But it was undoubtedly like looking for a needle in a haystack. Driven almost crazy by anxiety, he locked Traitor in the torture chamber and interrogated him every day. "Tell me, where on earth is that person?" Maleficent is ruthless and the methods he uses are extremely cruel. Traitor couldn't bear it and sent messages to me every day, begging me to help him. I always remained indifferent. The physical pain he is suffering now is not even 1,000th of what I endured in my previous life. Until Maleficent lost his patience and once again had the intention to kill Traitor. Traitor, cornered, was ready to fight to the death. "Astra, if you keep standing by and doing nothing, I'll immediately confess our cooperation to Maleficent." Looking at the message sent from the brain screen device, there was finally a trace of change in my eyes. I looked at Loyal, who was dozing off beside me, and said, "Inform Uncle Loyal. We can take action now." The whereabouts of the informant quickly reached Maleficent's ears through special channels. At that time, Maleficent had just finished beating Traitor to vent his anger. Upon suddenly hearing this news, his bloodthirsty black eyes filled with hostility narrowed, and he let out a sneer of an unclear meaning, saying, "You really do surprise me. I'm becoming more and more curious about who is pulling the strings behind all this. Let me guess." Maleficent took 2 steps forward and stared at him menacingly. "Are you an undercover agent?" Maleficent wanted to use psychological tactics to force him to reveal all the truths. However, his approach gave Traitor an opportunity. Traitor suddenly leaned forward and, when Maleficent wasn't prepared, kissed him on the mouth. In an instant, Maleficent's face turned as dark as ink, and he abruptly stepped back. Boundless killing intent welled up in his pitch-black eyes. But Traitor was still playing the hero and provoked him. "I'm not anyone's lackey. When Vindictive wanted to place someone by your side, I deliberately let myself be chosen by her. Maleficent, do you know that you look like you're easy to dominate?" Loyal and I, who were far away at the Loyal family's residence, both widened our eyes in unison when we heard these audacious words coming to the earphones. We exchanged a glance and saw the astonishment in each other's eyes. Loyal gave a thumbs up and mouthed, "Explosive. It's so explosive. When we saved Traitor earlier, we planned to use him to restrain Maleficent, fearing that he would turn against us. We used the excuse of performing an operation on him to install a smart chip with a miniature bomb inside his body. As a result, Traitor didn't dare to act rashly." The voice on the other side of the earphones continued, "Maleficent, I thought I'd never be able to have you in my entire life. Unexpectedly, by some twist of fate, I got to enjoy you once. You don't know How I felt when you were under me at that moment. Bang! Traitor's voice stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of a heavy object falling. Maleficent kept repeating the action of smashing Traitor's head with a mace, and his voice was as chilling as if soaked in blood. "You're courting death." It was only when Raider was on the verge of death that he regained his senses. He took off his blood-stained suit jacket, put on a clean shirt, and once again became that elegant and handsome young man, prepared to fly to Bai-Dong-Di. The moment he stepped out of the private room, Maleficent glanced at Traitor, who had fainted inside, and made a throat-slitting gesture to his subordinates. Luring the enemy into the trap. Catching the turtle in the jar. Now that the male turtle has entered the jar, all that's left is the female turtle. I took off my earphones, moved my sore and stiff neck, and said, "Send someone to take me back to the Maleficent family." Although Maleficent was now burned and with troubles and had no time to pay attention to me, for the sake of safety, Lil still sent those dozen or so tough bodyguards to escort me throughout the journey. When I rushed back to the Maleficent family's residence, I happened to run into Maleficent, who was about to go out. "Uncle." Having not seen me for a long time, there was also a hint of caution in Maleficent's eyes when he looked at me. "Astra? Where have you been all this time?" I was completely unaware of his vigilance and ran straight to his side. With my head slightly lowered, I stammered, "Uncle, there's something I've been thinking about for a long time, and I don't know if I should tell you." Maleficent asked with a smile. "What is it?" I waved my hand and motioned to him. "Lower your head, and I'll tell you quietly." Maleficent hesitated for a moment but did as I said. "Uncle, I stood on tiptoe and leaned towards his ear. But I lost my balance and stumbled to the side. Without thinking twice, Maleficent instinctively reached out and wrapped his arm around my waist. I took the opportunity to hug his neck. Maleficent turned his head and asked me, "What were you going to say just now?" From a distance, we were pressed tightly against each other, looking as if we were about to kiss. "Uncle." I suppressed the nausea in my heart and spoke again. This time, before I could finish my words, Vindictive's shrill voice came from the entrance of the villa. "What are you two doing?" She took a big step and came in front of us. Maleficent let go of me at the right moment. I quickly stepped back to the side, blushing and lowering my eyes, and said in a low voice, "Nothing." I denied it verbally, but my blushing cheeks seemed to hold more unspoken words, inviting others to imagine. Vindictive immediately misinterpreted the situation. She turned to look at Maleficent, waiting for him to give her an explanation. Maleficent had been delayed by me for some time just now, and he was now in a hurry to go to Bai-Dong-Di. He had no mood to waste words on matters of love. Ignoring the woman's angry and questioning gaze, he lifted his foot and walked away. His silence made Vindictive even more flustered. She blocked his way and shouted angrily, "Don't you dare leave." Facing the woman he loved, Maleficent eventually showed a bit more patience, and he softened his tone and said, "I'll explain to you when I get back." But his tone was still very cold. Sensing the warning in Maleficent's tone, Vindictive showed signs of backing down and took a small step backward. I quickly added fuel to the fire. "Yes. Vindictive. Stop pestering Uncle. He really has something important to deal with." As soon as these words came out, Vindictive lost her rationality. She grabbed Maleficent's arm and ordered, "Maleficent, I want you to make things clear to me right now. Get lost." Maleficent's patience ran out. He suddenly shook off the woman clinging to him and strode outside. "Maleficent! You scumbag!" Vindictive fell to the ground in a sorry state and shouted helplessly at the man's back. But she still couldn't call him back. I squatted down, looked Vindictive in the eye, and pretended to be angry as I warned her. "Vindictive, don't say that. Uncle is the best person in the world. In the future, he will also be a good husband and a good father." "What do you mean? Make it clear." As the saying goes, a woman in love has zero intelligence. Even a scheming and vicious woman like Vindictive is no exception. She was eager to grab my hand. I nimbly dodged and shook my finger mysteriously, saying, "I can't tell you. This is a little secret between me and Maleficent." After leaving the Gu family residence, I had someone reveal Maleficent's whereabouts to her. That night, I also boarded a plane to BAI-D. I posted a status on my social media. There were 3 pictures. One was a plane ticket from the Zhang family directly to BAI-D. One was a close-up photo of the 2 of us that I had coaxed Maleficent to take before. One was a picture of the airplane wing. The caption was, "I'm going across the ocean to pursue true love." It was only visible to Vindictive. As soon as I posted it successfully, Vindictive's life-threatening call came through. I didn't answer it. I let the ringtone fade away, and then ring again. Then I turned off a screen and powered off my phone when the plane took off, cutting off all contact completely. The moment Maleficent landed in BAI-D, it meant that he had lost the initiative. He became a lamb at the mercy of others. Loyal's father played with him like walking a dog. After staying in BAI-D for half a month, he belatedly realized that he had been set up. Unfortunately, heading for Filtley, it was too late. On the day he wanted to return to the country overnight, he was knocked unconscious at the airport. When he regained consciousness, he was horrified to find himself in a strange place. There were shackles on his hands. There was an alarm device on his ankle. And around his neck, there was a metal collar. And he was tied to the wall like a dog. In this state, he didn't even have the most basic human rights. But it didn't matter. Maleficent was originally no better than a beast. Even though he was at a disadvantage, Maleficent could still remain calm. He stood up from the ground and his gaze swept towards the only place in the secret room that had light. I was sitting leisurely on the sofa, crossing my legs, and staring at him mockingly. Traitor stood behind me with his hands behind his back, like a dutiful bodyguard. "It's you?" A hint of shock leaked from Maleficent's slightly dilated pupils. I rested my chin in my hand, leaned forward, and looked at him with a smile. "Uncle, do you like this gift? This exclusive secret room play that I carefully created for you." All the things were connected at this moment, and Maleficent couldn't believe it. "How did you do this?" "Of course. You told me. If it weren't for him, I'm afraid I would never have known the truth about my parents' death in my entire life. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have known about this fatal handle of his." Upon hearing this, Maleficent was even more puzzled. "You don't need to inquire too much. Just lie down and enjoy the happy life that follows." I stood up and looked at Traitor. Revealing a meaningful smile, I said I would make Maleficent her exclusive possession. "He belongs to you for the next 3 days. Enjoy this hard-won-to-person world." I had put strong drugs in the food I sent them, to ensure that they were constantly in a state of thrilling excitement, like riding a roller coaster. Even if their minds were tired, their bodies would still be in an excited state. 3 days later, the door of my secret room opened. As I had hoped, I saw Maleficent lying in Traitor's arms, on the verge of death. However, Traitor's next action was beyond my expectations. "Immediately prepare a helicopter and $10 million for me and send us out of here. Otherwise, I'll die with you." As he spoke, he put down Maleficent, picked up a sharp piece of porcelain, rushed towards me quickly, and pressed it against the main artery in my neck. "You too?" I raised my eyebrows slightly and looked at Maleficent in surprise. I was surprised that in just 3 days, he had bewitched Traitor and made Traitor have the idea of flying away with him. But Traitor seemed to be too happy. There was still the miniature bomb chip that we had implanted in his body. Thinking of this, I smiled. "Okay." The helicopter and the cash were prepared by Loyal's father's men. When they took off on the flat ground by the sea cliff, Loyal and I watched quietly from a nearby tower. I counted silently in my heart, 10. 1. Bang. Just as the helicopter rose into the air, it exploded with a loud noise. The powerful shockwave suddenly spread out, creating circle after circle of ripples on the sea surface. Countless dollar bills that hadn't been burned fell fluttering from the sky. They fell like snow, fluttering and continuous. The scene was as spectacular as it could be. Let's talk about 2 things at once. The time goes back to 20 days ago. After I arrived in BAI-D, I kept updating my love-chasing status on my social media. Vindictive, relying on the phone's location, found the hotel where I was resting. 2 people who looked very much like me and Maleficent walked past her with their arms around each other. They entered the elevator intimately and affectionately. Vindictive was almost driven to the verge of a heart attack out of anger. She took another elevator and chased after them. She kicked open the slightly ajar door and angrily asked, "Maleficent, is this the important thing you said you had to do? Coming to a foreign country to have an affair with your adopted niece behind my back?" The two people on the bed, who were moving up and down, ignored her. They were obviously in a state of ecstasy. "Maleficent, who are you?" However, when she took a big step forward and lifted the quilt, what she saw was a muscular and tough man with thick chest hair dyed reddish brown. The tough man, whose good time had been ruined, was furious. He suddenly stood up straight and cursed, "Nunca has visto a alguien más dormir?" Vindictive felt humiliated and angry at being tricked, but more than that, she was afraid of the tough man. She apologized in a trembling voice, "Lo siento, he intronto a la persona equivocada." Unfortunately, having fulfilled the tough man's mood had been spoiled, and a simple apology couldn't resolve the conflict. He snapped his fingers, and immediately someone came in and dragged her out. The last sentence Vindictive heard before being taken away was, "Tienes que pagar por tus acciones." When Vindictive was released, she had already endured a round of inhumane torture, and in this lawless baid, as a beautiful woman without anyone to protect her, she was destined to be surrounded by wolves, full of dangers. I have to say that Maleficent has been favored by the goddess of luck throughout his life. Traitor's body was completely destroyed in that explosion. When Maleficent was fished out, he still had a faint breath, but he was severely burned. In order to save his life, he was amputated at a high position. After lying in the hospital's ICU for half a year, he barely managed to save his life. After another year of recuperation, Maleficent basically recovered. At this time, he was sued in an international court with a file. During the live broadcast of the trial, the informant directly identified his numerous crimes on the spot. The nameless heroes who had died miserably many years ago finally got their revenge. In the end, Maleficent was sentenced to death, and the sentence was to be carried out immediately. This was not only to comfort the spirits of the heroes in heaven, but also to deter the drug dealers who had been running amok outside the law. As for the huge business empire that Maleficent had built with blood and human lives, it was confiscated and distributed all over the world, to support more anti-drug causes. I believe there will eventually come a day when the sky is clear, the breeze is gentle, and everything is harmonious. The end.